Welcome, and I appreciate the opportunity. I was asked to set up the context for the presentations this afternoon, and the idea of reconciliation, didn't take hold. When the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out, the '94 calls to action was mostly public institutions. It wasn't until the bodies were found, and then all of a sudden the public paid attention. And people keep asking me, what do you mean by reconciliation? It means it's such an open-ended term for many people, depending where you stand in relation to what happened. And so I wanted to break it down just quickly how I see it. You sort of got political reconciliation, which is kind of comprehensive land claims, modern-day treaties, treaty implementation, jurisdiction, and shared decision-making. Those are kind of political negotiations. You have to involve the governments and lawyers are involved, et cetera. And then you got what I call institutional reconciliation, in the mesh sector. So municipalities, education, social, and healthcare. Those folks in that sector are moving on their own version of reconciliation in the institutional frameworks that they have to operate in. And then you got economic reconciliation. Economic reconciliation to me is three different categories: partnerships, proponency, and procurement. And those three dimensions is what I see in the resource sector, providing leadership in creating an enabling environment and the enabling mechanisms for Indigenous businesses and First Nations owned enterprises to get involved in major undertakings across Canada. So, I started Anishinaabe Development Fund 25-something years ago, and there was just a handful of us that was doing financing on these small projects across the north. And it wasn't until the Green Energy Act came in, where equity deals were happening. And the way they enabled that was actually under the Green Energy Act, and they had three dimensions to that, to allow equity ownership in projects. One was study money. So communities can apply for it to do their own site investigation, because we all know there's value in the data. The second was what they call an Aboriginal adder to the power purchase agreement. So if you had a partnership with a community, then you would get extra pennies per kilowatt on your power purchase agreement. The other one was an Aboriginal loan guarantee. And the Aboriginal loan guarantee from the Ontario Finance Authority actually enabled equity partnerships. So if you had like a small hydro site, $100 million, so the debt equity ratio may be 60-40, so the 40% is $40 million, a 50-50 split with the private sector partner. The $20 million the First Nation has to raise to complete the deal. The the Ontario Finance Authority did the Aboriginal loan guarantee 75% on the Aboriginal side of the equity deal. So at $20 million, they said we'll backstop $15 million out of the 20, which is a lot more reachable for the $5 million the First Nation had to raise to get involved in these deals. That was back 10, 12 years ago, where those type of financing and the opportunities for First Nations to get involved in those type of things. So moving from, and then proponents is a big deal. So all the Indigenous businesses, all the First Nations enterprises that want to move towards outside, the reserve or outside the market that they're in, bidding in the supply chain of major corporations is a big deal. It gives an opportunity for First Nations and Indigenous members, to get involved in the world of commerce. Which, as we all know, that wasn't the case, as I would say 30 years ago. Because I moved here 30-something years ago, and there wasn't that a whole lot of Indigenous enterprises in Thunder Bay. So that's a big deal. The federal government in procurement said they're going to reach 5%. So what's the federal government's budget for goods and services? It's $22 billion. So 5% is $1.1 billion is the floor they want to reach for Indigenous businesses. So all across Canada, because I travel across Canada, Corporate Canada is partnering with First Nations and Indigenous enterprises to help go after this $1.1 billion of Aboriginal set-aside contracts that they're hitting. That's $1.1 billion. And they actually tweaked the rules to enable enterprises to bid, because before it used to be 1/3 of Indigenous employees. They had to loosen that, because if you calculated the numbers, it was a virtual impossibility, to actually reach that, given the numbers we are, population-wise proportional to the Canadians and stuff like that. So that's happening. And then I'm part of CCAB's Progressive Aboriginal Relations jury. And what that is a framework that allows Corporate Canada to get certified as a PAR certified company, which has 4 corners to that framework. One is leadership, the other one is community investments, Indigenous employment, Indigenous supply chain. So I get to see what Corporate Canada is doing across Canada. So one company in the oil sands had $800 million spent, Indigenous spend. $800 million. OPG, I was at their nuclear thing down south, and they're committed to $10 billion Indigenous spend. That enables Indigenous enterprises to get involved in the economy. As long as they have the capability statement, that we're capable of delivering the apples when it's time to deliver it. So that matters. So the partnership over time, the procurement, and now we're looking at Indigenous-led undertakings. I just saw former Chief Peter Collins. He's leading the transmission line of Hydro One, for the Waasigan line. The East-West tie, the Watay Power. It sounds like recent news, but Five Nations Energy was actually celebrated their 25 years anniversary of being a completely Indigenous-owned transmission line in Ontario, the first one across Canada. And so the trends around the undertaking is happening, Indigenous-led projects. And that's what's happening in the Ring of Fire. 2 communities decided to work together and lead probably the most extensive and most expensive environmental studies in that region ever. Like, I'm talking about tens of millions of dollars. In fact, we have Councillor Martin Falls First Nations, Robert Munias, if you want to wave your hand over there. He's joined us. He's part of the working group, and he's on the council. And we have a working group moving forward on those environmental. Why are they doing that? Because they want to generate the information needed to make an informed decision. And the second is that it's their homelands. And they want to ensure that the regional infrastructure that they're looking at is not going to impact their way of life in a way that tips the balance, that the impacts outweighs the benefit. The benefit has to outweigh the impacts at the end of the day. And the only way you're going to learn that is by actually an Indigenous-led environmental assessment. You actually design the scope and negotiate with the regulators how you're going to do that from an Indigenous-centered lens around the environmental studies, the impact studies. Excuse me. When you go coast to coast, we hear that, right? I don't know if you follow the Indigenous business news. If you follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I highlight what I call Indigenous bright spots. There's probably 98% bad news when it comes to Indigenous issues, flare-ups, crisis. But what I do is highlight the good news. And the first time I went to Vancouver, it was because of the Board of Governors at Lakehead had 2 tickets for this Indigenous Youth Forum, or it was called the Native Youth Forum back then. And that was the first time I've been on that reserve in North Vancouver City. And not much to see. But now, if you look back a year ago, they just announced a multi-billion-dollar condo development right north city of Vancouver. Multi-billion-dollar condo development to address the housing. The East Coast, if you guys can remember, was this lobster crisis that you might have heard, before. And so you had, the traditional ways and of the Indigenous Mi'kmaq fishermen with the lobsters. And then you had all these independent commercial fishermen, trying to feed the industry and over harvesting and all that kind of thing. The Mi'kmaq people of the East Coast bought the industry, Clearwater. It was $1 billion deal. So all those independent, fisheries, commercial fisheries, now has to sell to the Mi'kmaq, who owns Clearwater. Now, $1 billion deal that they financed. So that chief that helped lead that deal is on a speaking campaign, trying to increase the confidence, the capacity, and the capital for allow other First Nations that you can do this too. Yes, we have to address the past. Yes, we have to address the historical wrongs, the historical harms. And he says, that we're going to move from historical, thank you, there's going to be a shift. That we're not going to talk about intergenerational wounds forever, but that shift's going to be about intergenerational wealth in the future. And that's the message, I think this platform is trying to share by, with showcasing some of the speakers here. And I do this, I look for these things everywhere across Canada because I want to shine light because for whatever reasons the news don't like to, I don't know what, they if it bleeds, it reads, right? Is there a thing, bad news is what everybody, picks up the paper for. And so we try to shine light on the good stuff and the big stuff that's actually happening that are Indigenous-led. So I thought I'd just share that with you guys so that, our team and this team and others are trying to create platforms to elevate and celebrate these successes.